Your time here on India Today. Donald Trump's latest post is a threat, but it also sounds desperate. Does that kind of pressure force Iran to comply, or does it risk pushing this conflict into dangerous escalation that we are seeing already?
Well, I think that the conflict has already escalated. I think that the response from the Iranian regime to deny that they were taking part in negotiations when we know that they do want to negotiate. They are because they are losing. That's already, and they're continuing to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, which is causing global effects, as well as them targeting civilians across the Gulf countries. All of these things have escalated to where it's at today. And that's why President Trump is putting out a message. He's being very clear with the Iranians, which I hope they take the message seriously. And he is saying that, he wants to see a reasonable negotiation to actually start bringing this about to an end. And if they're not willing to do that, President Trump has a plan. The American military has shown their ability to operate at will in the country. So that's kind of where we're at.
No, but the fact is that the Americans have suffered severe setbacks. President Trump now is openly warning of strikes on power plants and bridges if the Strait of Hormuz isn't reopened. Does setting a public deadline strengthen deterrence or lock both sides into a corner?
Well, President Trump, that's his style. As we've talked about, I'm sure you guys have covered it as well. He does do these negotiations publicly, where he does, make posts about this, and set these deadlines publicly. And so it all depends on the response from the Iranian regime or from whatever entity he's negotiating with normally. However, I think at this point in the conflict, we're not going to see President Trump when he gets a positive response or when he feels like there's something moving. That's when you'll see him, say, okay, now I'm giving them 10 days or, these different public notes that he's announced. But right now, with where we're at with the Iranian regime and the tone from his latest posts, I believe that we're at the end of the line for the Iranians. I don't think they're going to get any more from President Trump. I think he's been very clear. This is what he means at this point. It isn't really part of the art of the deal. He's just saying what he means.
And with President Trump calling the rescue which has happened an Easter miracle, gives the war a clear religious framing. My question then is, does invoking faith and symbolism in the middle of a conflict help build public support, or does it risk deepening divisions and hardening positions on both sides?
Well, from the American perspective, I can tell you most of us don't think that the Iranian position can be hardened or radicalized any further, especially when it comes to religion. These are people who have used religion as an excuse to kill innocent non-Muslims of all different religions. And America, we have all religions in our country. So we're not fighting for any one religion in this war. I think we are just pointing out that, as you said, the framing that we're on the right side of this. We're not the ones who are promoting, apocalyptic beliefs that are, completely incompatible with pluralistic society.
In fact, with the rising attacks, expanding theaters, and civilian spillover, are we still in a phase of calibrated signaling, or has this conflict crossed into what is visibly now an uncontrolled escalation?
I wouldn't say it's uncontrolled. I think that the United States military has all of these phases planned out. The phase that President Trump is talking about with targeting, the energy infrastructure. This goes back to the nuclear program. These energy nuclear quote unquote nuclear energy plants have been as well used as part of Iran's nuclear weapons program. And so all of these things have been planned out from the US military, and this is an escalation phase because that's what President Trump has asked for, because we've seen the Iranians are not complying, not taking the talks seriously. But I wouldn't say that the US military, is ever going to go into a phase unplanned. They have mapped out what these type of phases look like, how much firepower they need, and what the goals are that they want to achieve in each phase.
Okay, that brings me to my last question, Professor Clare. Donald Trump argues he can deliver results without prolonged wars. But this approach is aggressive and urgent. Is this effective statecraft or a sign that the strategy is under strain and could destabilize the region further?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that, there's been a lot of talk about President Trump's unconventional approach to statecraft. And, there are different opinions on that. And, I'm sure that there are times where you could say, okay, what was this really as effective as if it had been more diplomatic? But the Iran case is such a special case, and it's such it's just deviates from everything that we know about dealing diplomatically with other countries, because the Iranian regime is so radical, and they've stated before that they would use these nuclear weapons if they got them, and so that's a very grave threat. And so I think President Trump is actually the right man for the job at the right time. Past American presidents have had to deal with Iran, but in many cases, they didn't have the military capability because our military has been chronically underfunded. So President Trump is the right man at the right time. He has all of these options on the table, and he's bold enough to use them.
All right, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The US forces have just pulled off one of the most daring rescues